Hello, it's Shari here today, and I'm going to be making this fun crayon themed card. You can see I have my little purple crayon friend there in this picture. So this is going to be using one of my favorite mini sets, which is Color My World. I just love that crayon, and it really creates an impact when you make it in all these colors. This design is a great way to use up some scrap cardstock you might have lying around. So you can see I've got 5 pieces of scrap cardstock that I pulled from my scrap bin, and I'm going to be doing some black embossing of these crayons. So to do black embossing, what I like to do is use VersaFine ink, which is a black pigment ink, and then use clear embossing powder. And this is going to give you a nice, crisp, black embossed image. So I'm just going to stamp out my image with that black ink, and then I'm just going to put the clear embossing powder over top. And I just think that this makes a much cleaner black embossed image than using black embossing powder. So I'm going to heat that up with my heat tool, and you can see how we have this nice crisp image on that bright cardstock. So I'm just going to repeat that same process for every one of my colors here. So I've got some peacock, I've got some cilantro, this is sunflower, my orange is some fake tan cardstock, and then finally that pink color is guava. So once I have all these embossed, I can use the coordinating die that cuts out that crayon, and I'm just going to cut them all out with my die cut machine. So as I'm cutting these out, I'm just laying them out in the order that I want them on my card. Now I'm taking just a little strip of white cardstock, putting some adhesive on it, and I'm going to go ahead and line up my crayons on this piece so that they act as one piece and I don't have to try to make them straight on my card. So I'm going to use my grid mat, and I'm going to start in the center. I'm going to start with that yellow crayon, and I'm going to center it up on this piece of cardstock. And this piece of cardstock is going to get hidden behind all of these crayons. So now once I have that yellow one in place, I can take the one that's going to be next to it, and I'm just starting on that right side. And I'm going to butt the two edges right up against each other and make sure that they're lined up. The tops and the bottoms are nice and even. Then I can go ahead and do the same thing on the left side of that yellow crayon and add my orange and my pink. So now all these crayons are glued together and will act as one image, and I just have to put it right on my card, and I don't have to try and line them up on my card base. So that's just a fun little trick to make things a little easier when you start to assemble the whole card together. So I'm just going to set those aside, and I'm going to work on the panel that is going to be my background. So I've cut a piece of white cardstock with the outside in stitched rectangle, so it has that nice stitching detail. And then I'm going to draw a line that's going to mark the center of this panel. So I'm just using my T-square, and I'm going to make a really light pencil line. So the first thing I'm going to do on this background piece is stamp out my sentiment. So this is where that pencil line marking the center really comes into play. So I have the word kindness sort of spelled out here. I'm using Herald ABCs, and there is only one letter or one capital letter for each one. And so I've got some holes here because I'm going to need to use that N twice and the S twice. So now that I've got that stamped out, I can just take the N and fill it in that void that I left. And then I can also add the second S to the end. And the reason why I'm stamping out my sentiment first is because I'm going to be doing some die cutting, and I want to make sure that I avoid where the sentiment is. So it's really important to do this part first. I'm going to go ahead and erase that pencil line that I made, because now that that word kindness is there, I can see where everything needs to be centered up on the lines that follow. I also started with the line at the bottom so that I could have it spaced where I wanted it from those crayons. Now I'm spelling out the words "the world with," And I'm just testing that to make sure that I have my spacing right. I spaced the words out a little bit more after I did my first test stamp so that it didn't look like one long word. And now I can stamp that down and center it up above the word kindness. Now I'm going to work on the word color, and you can see I've pulled out some inks that match my crayons, and I'm going to be changing up the font a little bit and using Riley's ABCs. I'm going to stamp each letter separately in a different ink color. So I'm going to start with the L that is in the center, and you can see that I've laid my inks out in the proper order so I don't get them messed up. And I'm going to stamp that L right in the center. And I'm using some sunflower ink for that because that matches my sunflower cardstock. And now I'm going to move on to the letters on either side. So I've got some fake tan ink to match my fake tan crayon, and I'm going to stamp out the O. And then I'm going to stamp out the other O in some cilantro ink on the other side. Now I can go in with the R and some peacock ink for the end of the word. And then I can go in with the guava ink and the C and finish that off. So I just like how this sort of ties in the color of the crayons with the sentiment. Now I can do the die cutting that I'm going to do on the background, and this is just to create some interest, but I still wanted to keep that nice bright white background for my crayons to pop off of. So I'm using the Just Stitched stars and the Just Stitching hearts. I'm using the smallest of the stars and the hearts, and then of course that little tiny one that just does one line of stitching. So I'm just going to scatter these around that sentiment, and I'm laying my crayons down so I can kind of see where those go. So having it overlap behind the crayons is the perfect use for a bigger star there. And you just kind of want them to fill the space. So once I have all these cut into the background where I want it, I can start to assemble my card. And I love to put these panels on foam tape and pop them up, especially because they have that small border around them. And I'm putting this white panel onto a fog cardstock card base. And that way there is some slight difference between the panel and the card behind it. I do like the look of the white on white, but I just felt like that fog sort of defined it a little bit. I'm also putting some foam tape on the back of those crayons right along that piece of cardstock I put on the back. And then I'm just going to line those up where I want them on the bottom. I've got some Stardust stickles that I'm going to add some sparkle just to some of these little stars that I die cut into the background. And then I'm also going to add just a few little dots of this stickles glitter around. I like this glitter because it's mostly just iridescent and white and doesn't pop out too much, but just gives it a nice subtle shine in the background for some interest. And then I decided just to add a little bit of detail to my crayons with a white gel pen. And I will say I should have done this first before I did stickles because I did stick my hand in one of my little stickle dots, but luckily I did not make a mess. So maybe do the white details first and then the glitter last. And then here is a look at that finished card. I love those bright colored crayons and how they pop off of that white background. And I just love the sentiment. I feel like it's something we should all remember in our daily lives. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.